Hanrui woke to bitter steam and a hand pressing two fingers into the hollow under his collarbone. The hand wasn't gentle. It was efficient. It moved to another point along his ribs, paused, moved again, and finally settled over the wreck of his right palm. Heat soaked in through the bandage there in slow waves. He opened his eyes. A low wooden ceiling. Smoke darkened beams. The smell of herbs cooked too long, and a fire that had been kept low for days. He was on a narrow cot. Someone had stripped his torn-outer robe and folded a clean undershirt over the worst of the bruises. The cot was hard. His back said so in 3 different languages. He turned his head. A small woman sat beside him on a stool. Gray hair tied back with a faded blue cord. Sleeves rolled to her elbows. Hands that looked older than the rest of her, blunt, knuckled, and stained green at the cuticles. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at his palm. "Drink," she said, without looking up. A clay cup sat on a stool beside her. He hadn't noticed. "What's it?" His voice came out as raw as it had in the ravine. "Bitter," she said. Slowly, he pushed himself up on one elbow. The room tilted, not as badly as the courtyard had. He took the cup. The liquid was the color of pond mud and smelled like crushed pine needles boiled down to tar. He drank. It was every bit as bitter as advertised. It also did something useful. The pain in his ribs receded by 1 degree. The tearing under his skin where the det key had cut through the meridians went from active to remembered. "More," she said. He drank more. She didn't stop pressing his palm. He looked around the hall while she worked. The room was longer than he'd guessed. Shelves climbed both walls from floor to ceiling, packed with stoppered jars and small paper boxes labeled in a hand done by candle. A long work table ran down the middle. Tools he half recognized lay on it. A bronze mortar, a knife for cutting roots, a balance with weights the size of plum stones. At the far end, a copper kettle sat on coals that had been kept low for so long. The iron grate beneath them had gone matte black. A chair stood beside the kettle, a plain wooden chair, the kind any apothecary would have had, worn smooth on the arms, empty. He looked back at the woman. "Senior," he started. "Yan Shifei," she said. "Don't waste breath on rank. You haven't got enough." "Yan Shifu, then." "That's fine." She lifted his palm and turned it slowly under the lamplight. The cut from the ravine had been packed with something that glistened green. The bruising at his wrist had been smudged with a yellow paste. Whatever she'd done before he woke was already working. "How long was I out?" he asked. "Half a day." "That's a luxury. It's medicine." She set his hand down. "Lie back. Your meridians want to tear themselves a second time and tell their friends about it." He lay back. She rose, crossed to the work table, and chose a different jar. He used the moment to look at her properly. She wasn't tall. Her robes were dark and clean but had been washed past the point of original color. A faded blue mark sat at the collar. A small painted river that had once been bolder. Her shoulders were squared in the way of people who'd carried heavy things for decades and weren't going to stop. The ledger sat at the edge of his vision, faintly red. He thought, very quietly, assess. The world grew threads. For one breath, every shelf, the door behind him, the kettle, his own chest all gathered faint colors. The disciples down the corridor showed up as small, dim sparks. Outside, a runner moved along a path with a bright red tally over his head. The mountain itself wore long, slow lines. Then he looked at Yan Shifei. She had no threads. She had a knot. a knot of black and white and red wrapped together, so old the edges had braided into a single dim gray cord. Around it ran a thin, steady wire of white light, sealed. Text formed at the edge of his sight, then stopped halfway. Assessed as subject obscured. Karmic weight. High active claims, sealed outstanding debts, sealed cultivation, sealed reading refused, sealing recognized. The window closed. Han Rui stopped breathing for 1 second longer than was polite. When he started again, Yan Shifei was watching him. "Stop looking at me like that," she said. "You'll hurt yourself." He didn't answer. She returned with a fresh jar, sat down, and uncorked it without a flourish. The smell, astringent, bright, a little like crushed mint and a little like blood, made his eyes water. She dipped 2 fingers in and pressed them above his sternum. "You used a low art," she said, "to move ki through dead meridians. Not a clever low art. The kind a desperate man finds because he's desperate." He kept his face very still. "I fell," he said. She paused. "That is what you told the Lian girl," she said. "I do not respect lies told to me twice. I was hoping you would not be paying attention. I am old. I am always paying attention. That is most of being old." He chose his next sentence carefully. It was an emergency draw against a valid claim. Her fingers didn't pause. The bright astringent paste went cold against his skin, then warm. "There it is," she said. "There, what is?" "The vocabulary." She set the jar down. "Tell me what you think you have," she said. He should have lied. He should have built a small, useful story and let her decide what to do with it. The ledger had taught him, in 3 days and 1 courtyard, that information traded was usually information lost. He didn't lie. He didn't know why. Maybe because his ribs hurt and her hands were warm. Maybe because the chair by the kettle was empty and she'd looked at it once while pretending not to. Maybe because Mara had said, "You keep receipts for kindness in another world," and he was tired of proving it. "A ledger," he said. "It opens when someone wrongs me. I can claim. I can collect. There are costs. There are always costs. It calls itself Heaven's Ledger." She made a soft sound, not a laugh. Something older than a laugh. "It calls itself many things," she said. "Heaven is the one that travels best." He turned his head a little farther so he could see her. The motion hurt. He did it anyway. "You've seen one before?" "I've seen one? Like mine." "Worse than yours. I had a teacher who carried one for 40 years. He died trying to make it forgive a thing that hadn't been paid for." The room was very quiet. Outside, somewhere in the sect, a junior bell rang. 3 small notes. "It doesn't forgive," Yan Shifei said. "Understand that one sentence before you understand anything else. It records. The 2 aren't the same." That sounds practical. It's the most practical statement I've ever made, and the most cruel. Don't flatter it. She picked up a clean rag and wiped her hands. Then she turned and looked at him directly for the first time since he'd woken. Her eyes were dark and steady and not interested in his comfort. "I'll treat your body," she said. "I'll feed you. I'll tell you when you're lying about small things. When you're lying about large things, I'll ask once and then I'll stop asking. I won't pretend you're a good young man. I've buried several of those. They weren't good. They were only young." He swallowed. "Yes, Shifu. I'm not your Shifu. Yan Qianbei then." "That's acceptable." She rose, refilled his cup with the bitter pond mud broth from a smaller pot on the side of the fire, and pressed it back into his hand. "Refusal," she added, "is also paid." He almost dropped the cup. What? You'll think soon, since you're the type that you can stop using it. You can. The ledger will let you. It'll simply count what you would have collected as a debt you owe yourself, with compound interest. By the end of the year, you'll be using it again, and you'll be using it badly because you'll be using it under panic instead of under planning. Do you understand? He understood. He'd spent 11 months at Bright Harbor watching customers do exactly that with medical bills. I understand, he said. Good. Drink. He drank. After a moment, because he couldn't help himself, he asked, "Whose chair?" She didn't look at the kettle. "A student of mine," she said. "He paid in full." She let the sentence stand. She didn't add to it. The chair didn't need a longer story than that. He closed his eyes for a moment and wasn't aware of falling back into sleep until he heard her, far away, saying, "Sleep. It'll try to collect from you eventually. It's patient and it remembers." The words followed him down. When he dreamed of a black receipt curling in alley water and a copper kettle that never quite came to a boil.